What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by. Today's project is this home light pressure washer, and the problem is that it doesn't run. Now I found this online in the free section of an online market, and I had to drive across town to get it, but when I saw it I was pretty confident that I could save it. Let's take a good look at it, find out what's wrong with it, and hopefully we can fix it. In this video, we try and repair this pressure washer. However, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. Now, I was able to speak to the person who was giving this away, and he said it didn't start, but it wasn't abused in any way, just covered in light sawdust, so it should run. Now, I don't normally have this kind of feedback from owners, and that's because most of the things I find were left on the curb, while this one was an ad for something to be given away. So the most common problem with pressure washers is that they sometimes go for long periods of time between uses. So much time passes that they're kind of forgotten about. This is of course the same problem with snowblowers and generators. What happens is that the gas in the tank will sometimes go bad and then the engine won't start. Other bad things can also happen in storage, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. Now, even though I know there's a really good chance that this engine works, I still want to do a diagnostic on it just so I don't get a nasty surprise like a broken engine. The first thing I want to check are the fluids, and the most important one is of course the oil. As you can see, there's plenty of it on the dipstick, and you can also see it at the bottom of the threads for the dipstick. Now, depending on what my plans are for this thing, we might change the oil later on in the video. Now, I was told that the gasoline was good, and it does smell fresh. Before we drain out the tank, I want to try and start it, that way we can see what it does and doesn't do. Try not to pay any attention to these stickers that say E10 is fine to use in this engine. I would only recommend using 100% gasoline without any ethanol. If you cannot find ethanol-free gasoline in your area, you might get away with using additives to help the ethanol from hurting your fuel system. Just as a reminder, make sure that the kill switch is in the on position, turn the fuel valve to open, and then put the choke to start, and then pull the rope a few times. So it didn't even try and start. Now I have to wonder if there's something else wrong with the engine other than the fuel system. The first thing I want to check is the ignition system. To do that, I'm going to use my spark checker. Now you can find these online for only a few dollars, and to use it, just install it in line with the spark plug, pull the rope a few times, and watch for an orange glow in the tester. Once again, make sure the kill switch is in the on position. As you just saw, there was an orange glow from the tester, so that means we have a working ignition system. Now, if you did not see a glow, then you might have a bad kill switch, low oil level switch, or even a bad ignition coil. The next thing I want to do is drain some of the gasoline from the bowl and see if there's anything wrong with it. To do that, I'll close the fuel valve, remove the drain bolt, and drain the gasoline from the bowl. Now, if no gas comes out of the bowl, then you might have a clogged valve, or your fuel screen in the tank might be clogged. Now, don't mind the dark spots at the bottom of the cup as it wasn't completely clean. However, notice that the gasoline looks more like tea than fresh gasoline. Now, as gasoline gets older, it gets darker, and by the looks of this one, it's got a few months on it. Now, if you pour fresh gasoline in the tank, that fresh gasoline will not make its way to the carb if there's already old gas in it. You would have to open the drain bolt for a few seconds to get rid of the old gasoline first. Next, I want to drain the gasoline out of the tank and see if it's as dark as what came out of the carb. So this is what came out of the tank, and as you can see, it's not as dark as what came out of the bowl. That means that the fresh gasoline was only in the tank and wasn't getting to the carb. Next, I want to put some fresh gasoline in the carb's throat and do a test start to make sure that the engine still runs. Fortunately, the engine started and ran for a few seconds, which is great news. Now, if your engine did not start, then you might check the spark plug for any issues. Just because we have a working ignition system doesn't mean it's actually getting through the spark plug. Now, I could try to put fresh gasoline in the tank and see if it'll run. However, knowing that there was old gasoline in the carb makes me suspect we're going to have to clean it. And if not, then we'll at least know what condition the carb is in. So this is our first problem. The frame for the pressure washer is in our way, so taking off the intake is going to be a bit tough. Unfortunately, the only way I could get around this obstacle was to turn the engine. To do that, I'll remove 3 of the engine mounting bolts and loosen the last one. That way I can turn the engine away from the frame. The other option was to make this part of the frame removable, but I didn't want to ruin the frame. After loosening the last bolt, we can now swing the engine away from the frame. Now we have more than enough room to take off the intake and the carb. I will say this, there's a lot of stuff to take off this carb before we slide it off the studs, but once everything's disconnected, it should come right off the engine. This is when we come to our next problem. We need to move the throttle lever so we can take off the governor linkage and the small spring, however it's stuck. I'm going to try and rotate it, but I didn't realize I was damaging it. We'll take a look at the damage later on. This is when we find yet another problem. We can't slide the carb off the studs without hitting the wheel, so I decided to remove the wheel. But I got so focused on removing the wheel, I forgot that the engine was loose and I could have just rotated the engine a bit more to clear the wheel. At least I know how to take the wheel off now. Now, after removing the bowl, there's definitely some buildup on it, but it shouldn't be too difficult to deal with. The float also has some buildup on it as well, but at least it's moving like it's supposed to. That also means that the needle that's attached to it is also not stuck either. It'll be easier to clean once it's off the carb, that way we can clean every surface that has old gas stuck on it. After that, we need to remove the fuel jet to make sure it's not clogged. Just make sure you use a flathead that's just as wide as the opening. If it's too narrow, you might damage the brass jet. So here's the brass jet, and there's supposed to be a hole in the middle of it, so we should be able to see right through it. Unfortunately, it looks like it's clogged, so we'll have to try to unclog it. I'm going to use a large piece of wire to clean some of the old gas that's around the opening, then I'll spray carb cleaner through the hole to unclog it. And it looks as though it's worked because we can now see right through it. The next thing I want to do is remove the emulsion tube, which you can see the top of when you look through the throat of the carb. The easiest way for me to do that is to push the top of the tube down and then give it a few taps to get it to fall out of the carb. Once it's out, we can then start cleaning any old gasoline that might be on it and unclog any holes that we find. As you can see, there's some corrosion on it along with the old gasoline. The main passage seems to be clogged as well, so I'm going to run a large wire through it so I can clear it. If you want to use carb cleaner for this part, you're absolutely welcome to. After that, the easiest way I find to clean these is to first use a wire brush, then clean the holes with a small wire, then use some carb cleaner on it. If you want to use some compressed air as well, that will work, but just be careful and wear some eye protection. The next thing I want to clean is the bowl. This probably would have been a lot easier if it wasn't gummy since there was just gasoline on it, but it's still going to come off with a wire brush either way, along with some carb cleaner. I like to use my worn out brass brush for this as it fits the contour of the bowl really well. Well, it's not perfect, but it looks a whole lot better. I'm satisfied that it's as clean as I can get it. Next, I'll try and clean the old gas off the float and the needle. I don't think the old gas is going to damage the float in any way, but the extra weight from the old gas might affect the way the float works. After a few more minutes of spraying carb cleaner and wiping, the float looks pretty good along with the needle. So I don't lose the needle, I'm going to install it back onto the float. After that, we can then tackle the stuck throttle plate. What I'm going to do is spray some carb cleaner at the base of the plate where the pivot is. After letting it soak, I'll keep spraying it till I can turn the flap to one side. Then I can remove the small bolt holding it to the shaft. Then I can remove the shaft for a better cleaning. After I'm satisfied with the cleaning, I'll then spray some lubricant on the shaft where it pivots in the carb. I'm going to use some silicone lubricant where the pivot is, and it should last for some time. I don't want to use any lithium grease because I don't want any dirt to build up on the brass shaft. Before we install the throttle shaft, we need to see how bad it was damaged from when I forced it to turn when taking off the carb. Now the plastic is not brittle, so even though there is some play, it's still going to work like it should. That means we can still use the original part. I've spent a lot of time taking this carb apart and cleaning every single piece that makes contact with gasoline. If I had to guess, I think I've spent about 40 minutes so far, and I'm not even done yet. There's still a few more parts I need to remove, inspect, and clean. If you want to make this repair a lot easier for yourself, just buy an aftermarket carb instead. Then you won't have to worry about whether or not you cleaned and cleared everything you need to. So this was right below the idle set screw, and inside this plastic body there's a brass jet. We need to make sure it's clear, and for me I like to use a micro drill bit. After it's clear, I'll then spray the carb's passages to make sure they're clear as well, then I'll start to reassemble the carb. Another reason why this pressure washer might not be starting is that the screen inside the fuel tank that keeps debris from getting in the fuel system is clogged by old sticky gasoline. If that happens, fresh gasoline won't make it into the carb, so of course it won't start. To fix it, you'll have to drain the gasoline out of the tank and then spray carb cleaner through the fuel line so it can loosen the old varnished gasoline. Do not use compressed air through the line because it might damage the screen. If you do break the screen, then you'll need to install an inline fuel filter. Once the carb is back together, we can now slide it back onto the engine studs, reconnect the governor linkage and its spring, then we can reconnect the fuel lines and all the other things that were anchored to the carb and to the intake. With the carb back on the engine, I'm going to reinstall the wheel because I'm getting kind of tired of filming this engine while it's crooked. After that, don't forget to put on the choke lever, then we can reinstall the air intake. Also, don't forget to install the vent hose from the gas tank and the emissions tube from the valve cover, otherwise dirt might get into the engine. This is the original filter, and even though the foam pre-filter isn't dirty, it is a bit discolored. However, the paper filter underneath it is almost in pristine condition. That shows you just how little this engine has been used. The last thing we need to do is replace the 3 bolts we took off earlier and tighten the one we loosened. I really don't blame the manufacturer for this oversight of having to almost remove the engine to service it, but I do blame the engineers for this design. I guess I never thought someone would have to remove the air intake or the carb. The other option would be to remove the studs, but I'm still not sure if there's enough room to even do that. And even though I'm using 100% gasoline, I'm still using a fuel stabilizer just to make sure I don't have any problems if I do forget to empty the fuel system. So it starts and runs very well, which is great news. Now most people forget that you cannot leave an engine running on a pressure washer without using the wand, as the pump is cooled by the water flowing through the pump. Otherwise it might end up overheating. This will damage the pump, and then you'll need to either replace the pump or rebuild it. In the future, make sure you close the fuel valve and let the engine run until it dies, but if you don't do that, just remember you can always close the fuel valve after you stop the engine, then you can remove the drain bolt and empty the fuel out of the bowl. That way if the gasoline does go bad, it won't affect the carb, and you won't have to go through what I just did. So my question is, would you have replaced the carb in this situation, or would you have cleaned it like I did? Personally, I would still try and clean it, and only when it doesn't work is when I order a new carb. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time. Please feel free to ask me any questions, and I hope to see you in the next video.